Flat Illinois farmland stretches to the horizon. Corn stubble, fence posts, a gray October sky pressing down on everything. Then at the edge of town, a half-acre of ruins. A water tower collapsed, steel beams twisted like the bones of something enormous. And in the center of that wreckage, a young woman kneels on cracked concrete. She is 20 years old, $53 to her name. She bought this pile of rubble for $5 because she had nowhere else to sleep. Beside her, a stray dog is digging, frantic, determined, throwing dirt and gravel behind him at a single spot in the foundation. She leans closer, runs her hand along the concrete, and feels it. A seam, deliberate, sealed. Something is buried under here. Something that has been waiting 68 years. She reaches for the pry bar. The Honda made a sound like a cough, then a rattle, then nothing at all. Maya Hart guided the car to the gravel shoulder of Route 9 and sat there with both hands on the wheel, staring at the dashboard, staring at the check engine light that had been glowing since June, the one she kept meaning to deal with, the one she never dealt with because there was always something more urgent than a glowing orange light on a car she didn't technically own anymore since Vera. She stopped that thought. Not now. Outside flat farmland, corn stubble and fence posts in a sky going the particular shade of gray that October meant in Illinois. A sign said Millhaven 2 miles. She'd never heard of it, never been to this state, never really been anywhere except the 7 group homes in 4 states that had passed her along like a library book nobody wanted to return. 20 years old, $58 in her wallet. No phone, the prepaid ran out of minutes 3 days ago. A duffel bag in the back seat with 2 changes of clothes, a good jacket, a bad situation. And on the passenger seat, the olive green tin, Vera's sewing kit, needles, thread, a thimble worn smooth from decades of use, a measuring tape with faded numbers, and tucked beneath the false bottom lining, though Maya didn't know about the false bottom yet, a folded piece of paper that would have changed everything if she'd found it 6 years ago. But she hadn't found it, so she did what she always did. She got out, grabbed her bag, locked the car out of habit even though there was nothing left worth stealing, and she started walking. Millhaven appeared slowly, the way small towns always do. A water tower in the distance, not the one, not yet just a regular working tower painted the color of old cream. Then a grain elevator, then rooftops, then Main Street, which was 4 blocks long and smelled like fried onions and diesel, and something underneath both of those things that Maya couldn't name. Something that felt like the opposite of the city, like the opposite of fluorescent group home hallways at 2 in the morning. Quiet. That's what it was. Real quiet. Not empty quiet. The kind that means people are somewhere nearby, just not rushing. She walked past a diner with a red awning and a hand-painted sign that said, Rosie's in letters that leaned slightly left like they were tired. A hardware store, a post office, a barber shop with a closed sign in the window, and a ceramic barber pole that still spun uselessly in the wind. And at the end of Main Street, the county courthouse. Parking lot full of pickup trucks, folding chairs in rows, a man on a flatbed trailer with a clipboard and a wireless microphone that kept cutting in and out. County surplus auction. She'd seen them before, cities and counties selling off whatever they didn't want anymore. Equipment, foreclosed vehicles, parcels of land that had become more trouble than they were worth. She drifted toward the crowd the way she'd learned to drift toward anything that was warm and public and free to watch. Stood at the edge, hands in her jacket pockets. A 1987 tractor went for $300. A shipping container went for $80. Someone paid $250 for a box truck with a transmission the auctioneer described as motivated. Then lot 12. The auctioneer's voice changed, just slightly. A shift in register, not quite a smile, more like the expression of a man who already knows the punchline and is enjoying the approach to it. Half-acre east side of town, formerly the site of the Millhaven Municipal Water Tower. Tower came down in the storm of 2013. Parcel includes the concrete foundation remaining structural debris and whatever wildlife has moved in since. He paused. Starting bid, $5. Nobody moved. A few people laughed. Not mean laughing, just the laugh of people who recognize a joke when they hear one. Come on, folks, $5. You spend more than that on gas station coffee. He looked around. No takers going once. 5? Maya's voice. Surprised even herself. Every head turned. She felt it. All of it. The stares. The assessment. Young woman. Duffel bag. Dirt on her jeans from the shoulder of Route 9. The expression people make when they're trying to figure out if you're brave or just lost. The auctioneer blinked. We have $5. Do I hear 10? Silence. Going once. He looked around one final time. Going twice. Gavel up. Sold. Lot 12 to the young lady in the back. See the clerk for paperwork. The man in the seed cap 2 rows ahead leaned toward his wife. Maya couldn't hear the words, but she could read the shape of them. His wife shook her head slowly. Maya didn't care. She had $53 left. And somewhere in this town, there was a half-acre of land with her name on it, which was more land than she'd ever owned in 20 years, which was none. The answer had always been none. The county clerk was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain. She took Maya's $5 bill without comment, had her sign 3 forms, handed over a folded property deed. Lot 12, the clerk said, east on Maple, past the grain elevator, right on Tower Road. Can't miss it. She paused. Well, you can't miss what's left of it. Tower Road was a dirt track that ran a quarter-mile off the main road before ending at a rusted chain-link fence with a gate that hung open on one hinge. Maya stopped at the fence and looked. The lot was exactly what the auctioneer had described, a half-acre of weeds and gravel and October brown grass. Inside the remains of something enormous. Twisted steel beams, broken concrete in chunks the size of car hoods. The cylindrical tank itself split open, lying on its side, half buried in dirt and wild grass like a fallen thing that had been lying there long enough that the earth had started to reclaim it. It was a wreck. But the ground was flat. The fence offered privacy, and on the north side the remains of a concrete wall still standing at 8 feet high, enough to block wind, enough to tarp against. She climbed through the gate, dropped her bag, and heard it, a sound from inside the split tank. Low, soft, not quite a whimper, but something. Maya froze, picked up a length of rebar from the nearest pile, held it like she meant it, walked slowly toward the gap in the steel. The last light of the day angled through the opening, and she saw movement. A dog, German Shepherd, or what was left of one, thin in the way that means weeks, not days, ribs showing through dirty fur, a front left leg held at a careful angle, not quite touching the ground, dark eyes that tracked her without blinking, not growling, not backing away, just watching. The stillness of an animal that has learned stillness is safer than either fight or flight. Maya set down the rebar, reached into her bag, pulled out the remains of a gas station sandwich turkey and Swiss on bread that had given up on being soft hours ago. Unwrapped it, set half on the ground, backed away 5 steps, and waited. The dog waited longer, a full 2 minutes, ears forward, watching. Then it stood, moved forward on that front leg with deliberate care testing each step, ate the sandwich in 3 bites. You live here, Maya said. The dog looked at her. Its tail moved, once, slow, like it hadn't used that muscle in a while and wasn't entirely sure it still worked. Yeah, Maya said. Me too, I guess. She named him Ember that night, because of the way his eyes caught the last of the light, because she needed to name something, because after 4 years of foster care, In 2 years of whatever came after foster care, she had learned that naming things was the first step toward staying. She set up camp using a tarp and two concrete chunks as anchors, laid out her jacket, put Vera's tin on top of her duffel bag where she could see it. Ember watched from 10 feet away, then 8, then 5. By the time the stars came out, and they came out the way stars only come out when there's no light pollution all at once, overwhelming like the sky had been holding its breath, Ember was lying 3 feet from her side. By morning, he was pressed against her back. That left leg extended straight beside him, relaxed in sleep, in a way it wasn't yet in waking hours. Maya lay there for a long moment with a stray dog against her spine and a property deed in her jacket pocket and $53 to her name, and thought, this is the most stable I've felt in 2 years, which said everything about the 2 years. The first 3 days were survival. Public restroom behind the courthouse unlocked during business hours. Water bottles filled at the sink. Bread and peanut butter from the gas station 2 miles down Route 9. A teenager behind the counter who didn't ask questions and sold her the day-old loaves for half price. 2 cans of soup she ate cold because she didn't have a way to heat them. And work. The rubble pile was bigger than it looked from the gate. Steel beams that weighed more than she did. Concrete sections the size of kitchen tables. She couldn't move most of it alone, but she could drag, she could lever, she could sort. 3 piles, steel to the east fence line, concrete to the west. Everything else in the center where she'd deal with it later. Ember followed her back and forth all morning like he'd been assigned to her. Like he'd finally found a job after months of unemployment and intended to take it seriously. By day 4, his left leg had started to bear weight more evenly, still careful on rough terrain, but no longer held above it. By the end of day 3, she could see the foundation. Not all of it, but a section in the center had cleared enough to show solid concrete. Thick, well poured. Not the kind of work you do to hit a deadline. The kind you do because you want it to last. Maya ran her hand along the surface. Somebody built this to stand. Day 4, a pickup truck slowed on Tower Road and pulled over. Maya heard it stop, heard the door, kept working. She'd learned in 2 years that the best response to most strangers was continued motion. You the one who bought the water tower lot? Maya straightened, wiped her palms on her jeans. The woman standing at the fence was maybe 65. Silver hair cut practically short. Canvas work apron over a flannel shirt. Hands that had spent decades holding tools, you could see it in the knuckles. In the way she held herself, upright but not stiff. The posture of someone who'd done hard physical work long enough that it became its own kind of elegance. She was carrying a water jug and a pair of leather work gloves. Nora Calloway, hardware store on Main Street. She set the jug on the fence post. Brought you this. You've been out here 4 days with no running water. People notice. Maya looked at the jug, then at Nora. She'd learned through 7 group homes in 4 states not to take things from people. Everything came with a price, or got taken back, or meant you owed someone in ways that never ended up fair. Nora saw it in her face. It's water, Nora said, not a contract. Maya took the jug. Nora looked around the lot, the sorted piles, the section of cleared foundation. Ember sitting at Maya's side, watching Nora with calm, assessing interest. You've done all this by hand. I don't have much else. Nora was quiet for a moment, considering, not uncomfortable. Tower came down 8 years ago, she said. Storm of 2013. County said it wasn't worth rebuilding because half the town was already on well water by then. She paused. Nobody's touched this lot since. Maya looked at the foundation. Somebody left a dog in it, she said. Ember's ear twitched. Dogs find their way to places that need them, Nora said. She held up the gloves. Here, your hands will be hamburger by the end of the week if you keep going bare. Maya hesitated. Nora didn't wait for the hesitation to resolve. She set the gloves on top of the water jug, turned back to her truck. Come by the store if you need anything. I'll run you a tab. I can't pay a tab right now. I didn't ask you to pay it right now. She climbed in, paused before starting the engine, looked back. That lot's been sitting empty 8 years. You're the first person to do anything with it. Her voice was flat, factual, like she was reading from a record. That counts for something. She drove away. Maya stood there holding the gloves, then put them on. They fit. Days 5 through 16 blurred together the way real work does. Wake at first light. Work until the heat of labor peaked. Walk to town for supplies. Work until dark. Sleep on the ground with embers' warmth against her side. Repeat. The rubble pile shrank. The foundation emerged. Bigger than she'd expected. 30 feet across. A concrete slab with a raised rim where the tower's base had been anchored, steel bolts jutting from the perimeter in an even circle rusted to dark orange. The concrete itself 4 inches thick. Well mixed. Carefully poured. The kind of pour that takes more time and more care than the job technically requires. Somebody built this right. That thought kept coming back. Nora came by every few days, sometimes with water, once with a paper bag from Rosie's 2 sandwiches wrapped in white paper, no note. She never stayed long, looked at the progress, nodded, left, and sometimes, not every time, but sometimes she'd say something before she went. My father always said the man who built this was the best thing that ever happened to this town's water supply. Maya was working the east side. She stopped. Who built it? Nora was already at her truck. Water engineer, a long time ago. Something happened and he left. A pause. That's how my father told it. Something happened. She drove away before Maya could ask more. So Maya went back to work. Because work was what she had. Ember. The slow emergence of a foundation that someone had built a very long time ago to last. Day 19 started with a clear sky and cold that put its breath in the air. Ember had been pressed against her through the night, radiating heat the way dogs do, like something steady and specific is happening inside them at all times without effort. His left leg had healed enough that he'd stopped babying it entirely. She'd noticed it a week ago, the slight change in his gait, the way he'd started running to the gate and back without thinking about it. Maya was working the east side of the foundation, clearing a collapsed section of steel paneling, when she noticed Ember wasn't following her. He was at the center of the slab, digging, not casual scratching, not a dog following a scent, focused, determined, increasingly frantic digging of something that has found a reason and does not intend to stop until the reason is resolved. Ember. She didn't look up. Stop. He didn't stop. Hey, Ember, no. She looked up. He was throwing dirt and gravel behind him with both front paws, head down, whining low in his throat, a sound she hadn't heard from him before. Not complaint, more like concentration, like effort applied toward a specific end. She walked over, crouched beside him. What is your problem? She ran her gloved hand along the concrete where he was digging and felt it. A seam, not a crack. Not the random fracturing of concrete under stress. She'd seen enough storm damage in 19 days to know what that looked like. This was different, deliberate. A line where 2 sections met that had been poured separately at different times. Between them, something dark and old. Tar or caulk gone brittle with decades. She knocked on the concrete to her left. Solid. She knocked to her right. Hollow. Her pulse did something she hadn't asked it to do. She knocked again, making sure. Left solid, right hollow. The sound different enough that she couldn't talk herself out of what it meant. Someone had built a sealed panel into the center of this foundation. On purpose. This was not an accident, not a structural variation. Whoever poured this slab had built something underneath it, had sealed it, and had left it there for... She sat back on her heels. How long had this tower been standing before 2013? She walked to her tarp, found her notebook. The auction paperwork was folded inside, formerly the site of the Millhaven Municipal Water Tower. Constructed 1953. 1953. This sealed panel had been under this foundation for at least 68 years. She looked at Ember, who had stopped digging and was now sitting at the edge of the seam ears, forward watching her with the complete satisfaction of someone who has done exactly what they came here to do. "Good boy," she said. His tail swept the ground. Once decisive, she borrowed a pry bar from Nora's store the next morning. Told her she needed it for debris removal, which was technically true. Nora handed it over without questions. Maya was starting to understand that this was Nora's approach to the world: give people what they need. Don't make them justify it. She was back at the foundation by 8. Ember was already sitting at the seam, waiting. "You could have helped me carry this," Maya told him. He blinked. She worked the flat end of the pry bar into the seam. The old sealant cracked, crumbled. She leaned harder. The concrete panel shifted just an inch. But an inch was enough. An inch meant the space beneath was real. She worked for 2 hours. The concrete was 4 inches thick and dense in a way that made it clear whoever had poured it wasn't cutting corners. Each section had to be levered aside carefully, set down gently, because she wasn't destroying this. She wasn't going to destroy it. Ember paced back and forth along the widening edge, whining occasionally. Once he stopped, stretched his nose out over the gap, and let out a single short bark, like he was announcing himself to whatever was down there. "Easy," Maya said. "Let me work." When the opening was finally wide enough, 18 inches across, 2 feet long, she lay flat on the concrete and looked down. A chamber, 6 feet deep, 4 feet across, walls of poured concrete that were— she reached down and touched them dry. Clean, not a crack in them, not a seep of moisture. Someone had built this to keep whatever was inside exactly as it was, for as long as possible, for as long as needed. And at the bottom, a wooden box, wrapped in dark oilcloth, secured with brittle twine, sitting on the dry concrete floor like it had been waiting with patience, with absolute unwavering patience. Maya stared at it. Her heart was going at a pace she hadn't asked for. She lowered herself into the chamber. Damp mineral air, old stone, the smell of something that hadn't breathed in decades. Her boots hit the floor. She crouched, reached for the box. Heavier than it looked. She lifted it carefully, climbed back out, set it on the concrete beside Ember, who immediately pressed his nose against every inch of oilcloth with the systematic intensity of a professional who takes his responsibilities seriously. "Easy," she said. She sat cross-legged, cut the twine with her pocket knife. The oilcloth fell open. A wooden box, dark walnut, dovetailed corners, a hinged lid, no lock. The wood smooth under her hands in a way that means someone finished it carefully, had taken time, had cared about the thing they were building, not just for function, but for what it meant. She lifted the lid. 4 things. A leather-bound journal, cover worn soft and dark. A stack of photographs wrapped in wax paper, still protected, still preserved. A bundle of papers tied with a faded blue ribbon. And a sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges. Handwriting across the front neat, deliberate. The penmanship of a generation that learned it in school because someone told them it would matter. To whoever carries the Hart name forward. Maya's hand went still. Hart, her name, her mother's name. Marlene Hart, who had died in a car accident in Ohio when Maya was 4 years old. Maya barely remembered her. A smell shampoo and something warm. A voice singing in another room. And then nothing. Then the system. She set the envelope down, picked up the journal. The leather cracked along the spine, the pages stiff, but intact, preserved exactly as intended. She turned to the first entry, April 14th, 1953. Started work on the municipal water system today. The council voted 5-1 to approve the project. Mayor Holt shook my hand and said this town has been waiting 20 years for a reliable supply. I told him we'd have it running by fall. My name is Edward Hart, and I am the new water engineer from Millhaven, Illinois. She read the words twice, slowly, both times. Edward Hart. She turned the page. Edward Hart had arrived in Millhaven in early 1953 with a civil engineering degree from the University of Illinois, his wife Frances at his side, and 3 job offers to choose from. He chose Millhaven because it was small, because small towns needed the work more, because Frances's mother lived 2 towns over and Frances wanted to be close, because Edward was the kind of man who made decisions by listing reasons until one set was longer than the others. He built the water tower in 14 months. The journal recorded everything: soil samples and load calculations, and the specific challenge of a water table that ran shallower on the east side of town than the geological surveys had indicated. It recorded the week a thunderstorm flooded the trench system and set them back by 10 days. The morning the welder he'd hired drove his truck into a drainage ditch and broke his wrist. In the afternoon they ran the first water test. Every valve held. I stood at the main tap in my own driveway and turned it on, and clean water came out, and I sat down right there on the ground and didn't move for a while. Frances came outside and found me sitting in the driveway. She said, "Are you all right?" I said, "We did it." She sat down next to me. We were in our good clothes. We'd planned to go to dinner. We sat in the driveway in our good clothes and let the tap run and didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Now get up, Edward. Our reservation is at 7. I got up. I loved that woman. Maya's throat tightened. She kept reading. The years that followed maintenance records with the same precision as the original construction. Expansion of the service area in 1957, when the east side developed faster than anyone had projected. A near crisis in 1958, when corrosion appeared in a section of the main pipe, and Edward caught it before it failed. A running account of the town's growth. New families, new businesses, the way a water system that works invisibly becomes the invisible backbone of everything that grows from it. And throughout all of it, in the margins of all of it, Marlene started school today. She cried for the first 15 minutes and then made 3 friends and didn't want to come home. Marlene won the spelling bee at district level. Frances is more excited than Marlene is. I'm more excited than both of them. Marlene broke her arm falling out of the oak tree in the backyard. She was trying to rescue a neighbor's cat. The cat was fine. Marlene less so. She didn't cry until we got to the hospital parking lot. Then she cried hard. I held her and thought I would take apart this entire water system with my hands if it would prevent this child from ever being hurt again, which is not a rational thought. But it is a true one. Maya read that last entry 3 times. She had never had anyone write about her the way Edward wrote about Marlene. Never had anyone, not in 7 group homes, not in the careful professional language of caseworkers and placement coordinators, write about her as though she were a thing that mattered more than anything else. More than the work, more than the accomplishment, more than everything. She understood now why he'd sealed this box. She didn't understand yet what had made him leave. She turned forward. The entries from 1961 onward were different. Same handwriting, same precision. But the tone shifted the way a sky shifts before a storm. Gradually, then all at once. A man named Raymond Renner had come to Millhaven in late 1958. Real estate development. He'd bought farmland east of town. He had plans, houses, commercial properties, a development that would change the character of the town if his projections held. He needed infrastructure. He needed water. He needed the municipal supply that Edward had built. He approached the town council with a proposal. Edward wrote about it with the controlled fury of a man who chose precision over expletives. Renner doesn't want to improve the system. He wants to own it. Once he controls the water access, he controls which parcels get developed and at what price. I told the council this at the August meeting. I laid out the engineering implications and the financial implications and the governance implications. 3 of them listened. The other 2 were looking at the check Renner had put on the table. The campaign against Edward started quietly. Rumors about mismanaged funds, questions about invoices that had always been in order, a letter to the county paper suggesting an audit. The audit happened, found nothing wrong, every dollar accounted for, every decision documented. But in small towns, audits are remembered longer than their results. The question outlasts the answer. That's how it always works. In January of 1965, the council voted 4-3 to restructure the Water Commission. A new position, different title, different pay, different person a man Raymond Renner had recommended. They didn't fire me for cause. They can't. Everything I did is clean. So they eliminated the position and created a new one and gave it to Renner's man. Same job, different name, different face. Legal, technically. Everyone in this town knows what happened. Some of them are ashamed. Some of them got something from Renner they wanted more than being ashamed. I built this water system. I have watched it work every day for 12 years. I know every valve, every joint, every section of pipe under every street in this town. And they gave the keys to a man who couldn't identify the main shutoff valve if the town were flooding. The handwriting was harder on these pages. Pressed deeper, less even. Then over 3 entries in February of 1965, Edward described sealing the chamber. The design, the pour, the waterproofing, the placement of the box, the final seal. Methodical. Of course he was methodical. He was an engineer. Even in his anger, even in his grief. If they take everything else from me, my position, my reputation, the system I built with my own hands, they cannot take what I have sealed inside the thing I built with my own hands. That will stay until someone who deserves it finds it. The next entry, Missouri. 3 weeks later. We left. Francis, Marlene, me. I loaded what I could and we drove south. Marlene cried the first day. She is 9 years old. She knows we're running even if she doesn't understand why. I told her we would come back someday. I don't know if that's true. I am 32 years into a marriage to honesty, and I am trying not to stop now. Maya closed the journal, sat on the concrete, Edward's concrete, and stared at the sky. She had a grandfather who built this, who was driven out of this, who had sealed everything he had into the ground before he left, and driven away with his daughter crying in the back seat. She needed to know what happened next. She opened the journal to the back and found the other entries. She had almost missed them. The journal ran forward from the first page to the Missouri entry of 1965, and then blank pages for what felt like the rest of the book. She had almost set it down. Almost. But the last 30 pages, written from the back cover, working forward, different ink, different pressure, the handwriting of a man whose hands had lost the steadiness of middle age, but had held on to the precision of someone who cares about what they're recording. The first of these back entries, November 2001. Frances has been gone 29 years. She left in March of 1972. Cancer. She was 54 years old and she died in a hospital room in Springfield with my hand on hers and the window open because she said she wanted to hear birds. Marlene left home when she was 18, 1974. Same stubbornness her mother had. Same jaw. She packed a bag one night and left a note that said, "I'll call when I'm ready." She didn't call. I looked for 3 years, hired a private investigator with money I shouldn't have spent. He found traces. A job in Columbus, an apartment in Cincinnati, a name on a lease in Dayton. But by the time he'd track her to one city, she was already in the next. She didn't want to be found. I stopped looking in 1977. I was 56. I had lost my wife, my daughter, my town, my career. The only thing I still owned was a box buried under a tower I couldn't go back to. Maya read slowly, because something was coming. She could feel it in her chest before it arrived. I am 80 years old, and I live in a rented room in Springfield, and I work part-time maintenance at a school. The children remind me of Marlene at that age. That particular loudness of children who haven't learned yet that the world can be unkind. I try to keep that knowledge away from them as long as possible. It is the only useful thing I can still do. Then a gap. Then in handwriting that had changed again. More urgent. The pen pressed hard. October 2005. Maya stopped breathing. A woman from the Ohio State Social Services called me this morning. Her name was Mrs. Gallagher. She said Marlene died in a car accident on February 3rd of this year. She was 49 years old. The page blurred. Maya pressed the back of her hand against her eyes. Hard. Kept reading. Mrs. Gallagher said Marlene had a daughter, a little girl, 4 years old, named Maya. She said Marlene had listed me as next of kin on a form she filled out at the hospital when the girl was born. That's how they found me. A form. 4 years old. My granddaughter is 4 years old, and I didn't know she existed until the day I learned her mother was already gone. Maya pressed both palms flat against the concrete, needed to feel something solid, underneath her, under her hands. I asked Mrs. Gallagher if I could take Maya. She said there would be an evaluation. I said I would do whatever it took. She said she'd be in touch. The next entry 2 weeks later. The state denied my petition. They said I am too old, too ill, my living situation too unstable. I am 84 years old, and I have a heart condition that requires medication, and I live in a rented room with a shared bathroom down the hall. They said Maya needs a stable home with qualified guardians. I told them I am her grandfather. They said that wasn't enough. Maya set the journal down. She pressed her palms against the concrete and held very still, and let the things she'd been reading settle into her body the way cold settles when you've been outside long enough past the surface, past the muscles, into something deeper. She had spent 16 years in the foster system, 7 placements, 4 states, believing that no one had ever come looking for her, that she'd been passed along because there was simply no one at the other end of the chain who wanted her there. She had built her entire understanding of herself around that belief, the way you build a structure around a load-bearing wall. You don't question the wall, you just build around it. But the wall had been wrong. Not partially wrong, not wrong around the edges. Completely, fundamentally, wrong at the root. Because an 84-year-old man in Springfield, Illinois with a bad heart and a rented room and a shared bathroom down the hall had called every number he could find, had written every letter he could write, had been told no by people with forms and official stamps and the full weight of a system that had already decided what was best for her, without asking her, without asking him. She looked at Ember, who had come to sit directly beside her at some point during the reading, his head on her knee, eyes half closed. But she could feel him paying attention, the way dogs pay attention when the person beside them is somewhere difficult and they've decided I'm not leaving. He tried, Maya said. Her voice came out smaller than she expected. He actually tried. Ember pressed his head harder against her knee. She picked up the journal. There were more entries. I call Mrs. Gallagher every month. She gives me very little. Maya is in a group home. Maya is doing well in school. Maya has been transferred to a different facility in a different state. She says it's not protocol to share more than this. I say I am her grandfather. She says I understand Mr. Hart. I say I don't think you do. I have been sending things. A blanket I knitted, it took me 6 weeks, I had to learn how. A photograph of Marlene as a baby. A letter addressed to Maya explaining who I am and where she comes from. I don't know if any of it was delivered. I ask. They say they can't confirm, which means probably not. I stopped calling in 2009. Maya would be 8 years old. She's been in the system 4 years. I don't call anymore because every call ends the same way. And something in me has started to accept, not believe, accept that this is simply what happens. That families splinter. That distances become permanent. That the things you build can be taken from you, and the people you love can be taken from you, and what remains is only what you put in the ground before they could get to it. I don't believe that. I want to be clear. I write it, but I don't believe it. I don't know what I believe anymore. I am 88 years old and my hands shake when I pour my coffee and I sleep 10 hours a night and still wake up tired. But I don't believe it. I'm putting that on record. The last entry from this section. One page, undated, but the handwriting told its own story slower than anything before it. Each letter formed with deliberate care, like someone who knows this might be the last letter they form and wants to form it correctly. I am going back to Millhaven. I know the tower may be gone or fallen. I know the town doesn't remember me. But the box is still there. I sealed it to last, and I have a letter to add to it. I have been writing the letter for 3 years. Different versions, different approaches, all of them wrong. Too much or too little. Too angry or too soft. Too long. Too final. I think I finally have it right. Because whoever finds this, whether it's Maya or someone else who carries this name, they should know what happened here. They should know this ground meant something, that a man built something on it that worked, that working things can be taken from you by people who prefer control to function, but that the ground holds the record. Even when the people are gone, the ground holds. I'm leaving tomorrow. It's an 11-hour drive. My heart isn't good, but I have enough medication to get there and back. I just need to get there. Maya sat with the journal in her lap as the October sun moved across the sky and the shadows of the steel beams stretched long across the concrete. He had come back, 11 hours with a bad heart to add a letter to the box and seal it again. And then she looked at the second sealed envelope at the bottom of the box. To whoever carries the heart name forward, she knew what was in it. She could feel the shape of it already. A letter from an old man to a granddaughter he had never met. Written in a rented room in Springfield, rewritten for 3 years until it was finally right. She didn't open it. Not yet. She needed a minute. She needed to sit with what she already knew before she let more in, before the next wave. She looked at the concrete beneath her, at the careful ring of steel bolts around the perimeter, at the cleared foundation stretching 30 feet in every direction, at the work Edward Hart had done in 1953 with 4 men and an engineer's mind, and the stubborn belief that if you build something right, it will last long enough to matter. He had been correct. It had lasted 68 years, long enough. Ember got up from beside her, walked to the center of the slab, to the exact place where the chamber was, stood there, looked back at her. I know, Maya said. She gathered the photographs, the journal, the envelope, wrapped them carefully in the oilcloth, her hand steadier than she had any right to expect. The foundation had held everything Edward Hart put into it for 68 years. It had been waiting. For her. For exactly her. She didn't sleep that night. Not really. She lay on her back on the concrete with Ember pressed against her left side, and Vera's olive tin pressed against her right, and the journal on her chest like a hand held there to keep something from flying apart. The stars were out again, the same stars as the first night, but different now, because she was different now. 20 years old, 3 weeks on this lot, and everything she believed about her own history had just been quietly, completely dismantled by a leather-bound journal and the handwriting of a man she had never met who had never stopped trying to find her. She stayed very still, because the feeling in her chest was enormous, and she wasn't entirely certain what would happen if she moved too quickly. Like when you've been carrying something heavy for so long that putting it down feels dangerous. Like your body has reorganized itself around the weight and doesn't know yet how to stand without it. No one had ever said someone tried. No one had ever said you weren't unwanted. You were just unreachable. There's a difference. She lay there until the sky went from black to that dark blue that means 4 in the morning. Then from dark blue to gray. Then the first pale orange line along the east edge of the world. Then she got up, because lying down wasn't going to solve anything. And Edward Hart had not built this foundation by lying down. First National Bank of Millhaven opened at 9. Maya was at the door at 8:57. Clean clothes, clean face. The bonds wrapped in a manila envelope she'd bought at the gas station for 40 cents because she wanted them to look like they'd been cared for, which they had been, for 68 years. The teller was a young man who looked at the envelope, then at Maya, then at the envelope again. "One moment," he said. He was gone for 4 minutes. The woman who came back with him was mid-60s, silver hair pulled back, reading glasses on a cord around her neck. She moved with the efficiency of someone who had worked in the same building for 30 years and was no longer surprised by most things. She looked at the envelope. "Mrs. Aldrich," she said. "Branch manager. Why don't you come with me?" The office smelled like old coffee and carpet cleaner, a ficus in the corner that had been there long enough to become part of the furniture. Mrs. Aldrich sat behind a clean desk and opened the envelope with the care of someone who had seen fragile things before and respected them. She spread the bonds out, one by one, 16 of them. Series E federal issue, dated between 1953 and 1961. She put on her reading glasses, reached for her calculator, then for a reference binder from her bottom drawer, the kind that doesn't exist digitally, the kind you print and bind yourself because you've learned that systems go down, but paper stays. The room was very quiet. Maya sat across from her with her hands flat on her thighs. "Don't hope too much. Don't let yourself hope too much. These could be worth nothing. These could be completely—" "You understand how Series E bonds work," Mrs. Aldrich said. "They grow over time," Maya said. "They grow over time." Mrs. Aldrich was still looking at the binder. Series E bonds issued prior to 1965 had a maturity period that extended over decades. These have all reached final maturity. They stopped earning interest at their final maturity date, but they don't expire. So they're still worth something. Mrs. Aldrich looked up. She had the expression of someone who is about to say a number and has learned over 30 years of banking to watch a person's face very carefully before and after. "The combined matured value of these 16 bonds," she said, "is $52,341. The number arrived, didn't land. Maya heard it. Processed the individual words. 52,341. Except the words didn't connect to anything real. They floated there, in the air between the ficus and the old coffee smell in Mrs. Aldrich's steady eyes. "I'm sorry," Maya said. "How much?" $52,341. Still floating. Maya gripped the armrests of the chair. Because $52,000 was not something her brain had a template for. It had a template for $50. It had a template for $200 when a tax return came through the shelter's address and felt like a miracle. It did not have a template for $52,000. It had never needed one. "Are you all right?" Mrs. Aldrich asked. "Yes," a whisper. "I just need a minute." Mrs. Aldrich gave her the minute, gave her 5, poured a cup of water from the pitcher on her desk without being asked, and set it near Maya's hand. Maya drank it. Then she sat there and thought about Edward Hart saving $50 at a time from a water engineer salary in a small Illinois town in the 1950s. 50 here, 100 there. Never a large amount. Never flashy. Just consistent. The same quality as the foundation. The same unwillingness to cut corners. The same faith that if you do the right thing consistently enough for long enough, it will eventually matter to someone. He didn't know who, he just believed it would. "There's paperwork," Mrs. Aldrich said. Her voice was gentle, professionally gentle, but more than just professionally. "To verify your identity and your connection to the original holder. The property deed and the journal you mentioned should help establish inheritance. It will take approximately 2 weeks. "Okay," Maya said. "Are you sure you're all right?" Maya stood up. Her legs worked. She was somewhat surprised. "He saved these one at a time," she said. "My grandfather. He saved them $50 at a time from a water engineer salary." Mrs. Aldrich looked at the bonds spread across her desk. at the yellowed paper and the faded federal seals and the neat handwriting on each one. "I know," she said. "I can see that." Maya walked out of the bank into the October sunlight, sat in the driver's seat of a truck that wasn't hers. Nora had loaned it for the errand without being asked. Just left the keys on top of the water jug that morning with a note that said, "Keys in case." Sat there for 8 minutes without starting it. Then she pressed her forehead against the steering wheel and cried. Not the controlled kind, not the kind you do when you're in a group home and you've learned to be quiet about it. The other kind. The kind that empties you out from somewhere you didn't know was still full. The kind that comes from finding out you were wrong about something you built your entire life around. She cried for Edward. For the monthly phone calls that got nothing back, but we can't share more than this. For the blanket he knitted because he didn't know how and taught himself anyway. For the letter he wrote and rewrote for 3 years in a rented room. She cried for Marlene, who had left and kept leaving and ended up in Ohio with a daughter she named Maya and a hospital form she filled out with her father's name as next of kin. Maybe because she missed him. Maybe because some part of her, even at the end of all that running, still knew he was the person who should be called. And she cried for herself. For 16 years of building a life on the wrong foundation. For being 20 years old and only now finding out the truth. She had never been as alone as she believed. She had been unreachable. There's a difference. It took her a long time to stop. When she stopped, she sat up, wiped her face with the back of her hand, looked at herself in the rearview mirror. 20 years old, red eyes, dirt still under her fingernails because she'd been working since dawn, and there's no such thing as perfectly clean hands when you're clearing a foundation. "Okay," she said, to no one, to Edward, to Marlene, to herself. "Okay?" She started the truck and drove back to the lot where there was still work to do. Day 25. Maya was working the north section of the foundation when she heard footsteps on the gravel outside the fence. She'd learned to read footsteps. These were old, the gait of someone whose hips had started to have opinions. She looked up. A man stood at the open gate, 72 or thereabouts. Tall frame that had been bigger once you could see the architecture of it. The height and the breadth settled now, but still there. Flannel shirt tucked into work pants. Canvas hat. A face that had been outdoors for 7 decades and looked exactly like that. He was carrying a toolbox, the old kind. Metal, latched shut, scuffed at every corner. He stood at the gate and didn't come through. Waiting, which was different. Most people who came to the lot either charged through or turned around. This man waited because he'd decided waiting was the respectful thing to do. "Walt Briggs," he said. "I live about a quarter-mile east. The farmhouse through the trees." Maya straightened, wiped her palms on her jeans. "I've seen your lights," she said. "I've seen yours." He looked around the lot, the cleared foundation, the organized piles, the half-started structure on the north end where she'd begun framing something that could eventually be walls. "I've been watching you work for 3 weeks. Long time to watch. Wanted to see if you'd stay." He said it simply, no apology in it. "I stayed," Maya said. "I can see that." He came through the gate, set the toolbox down, and then he did something unexpected. He opened his wallet, not for money, for a photograph. He held it out. His hand was steady, the hand of someone who had worked with tools for 50 years and still had the evidence to show for it. Maya took it, black and white, the kind that had the dense particular quality of age, not sepia, not faded, but somehow packed fuller than modern photographs. A little girl, 8 years old maybe, standing in front of this fence. This exact fence, or the fence that used to be here, the chain link, the same the lot behind her, recognizable even in ruins. Dark hair, a gap in her front teeth, laughing at something outside the frame. On the back in handwriting, Maya recognized Marlene. August 1964. Before, one word. In the handwriting of a man who built foundations. Before the council vote, before Raymond Renner made his final move, before the truck packed in the dark in the drive south and Marlene crying in the back seat. Maya's throat closed. She looked up at Walt. "He sent this to you," she said. "Before he drove back," Walt said. 2008. Sent it with a letter. He paused. "I was 16 years old when Edward Hart left this town. I'd been working for him a year running maintenance, learning the system. He was the kind of man you don't forget." Another pause. Longer. "He sent me the photograph and a note. Said if anyone with the Hart name comes to this lot, give them this. Let them know someone was here before them." Maya looked at the photograph again. Marlene at 8, laughing, whole, still here. "You look like her," Walt said. His voice had gone quiet. Her jaw, her eyes. "When I saw you at the fence on day 1, I had to sit down when I got home." Maya handed the photograph back. "Keep it," Walt said. He meant it for whoever came back. She looked at the photo one more time. Her mother at 8, whole and laughing in a town she would one day run from and never return to, in front of a fence that would still be standing 60 years later when her daughter stood on the same ground. Maya folded it carefully and put it in her jacket pocket, against her chest, next to the journal. "He died on Route 9, she said. "I know, I read the notice in the register." Walt bent down and picked up his toolbox. "I came to his lot the next day and sat on the gate for a while." A pause. "Then I went home, because there was nothing to do. Until there was." He looked at the half-started frame on the north end. "You need help framing that wall," he said. "I've never framed a wall." "I know, that's why I said you need help." Ember walked over from where he'd been lying in a patch of thin October sun. He sniffed Walt's boots, sat down beside him, which meant yes. Ember's yes was not given lightly. "Okay," Maya said. "Show me what to do." Walt set the toolbox down and opened it. Inside the tools of someone who had used them their whole life and treated them like they mattered. Hammers with handles worn smooth at the grip. A level. Chisels. A framing square that had been resoled twice and would outlast everyone in this lot. "First thing," Walt said, "measure twice. Cut once." "No." He looked at her. "Measure twice, then put it down, then measure again on a different day when you're not tired. Then cut. That's 3 times. "Yes," he said, "when it matters." They worked until the light left. By the end of the first day, one wall section. Lying flat on the foundation. Not raised, not complete, but solid. The corners square. The joints tight. The lumber cut to specification and not a quarter-inch off. Maya ran her hand along the top plate. "Good work." She could feel it, the same quality she felt in Edward's foundation under her feet. Not show-off work, not rushed work. Work done right, because anything less was a waste of time. Vera used to say the best thing about fixing something is it stays fixed. People don't always. But a wall you built right stays, Walt said. "Yeah." He handed her a nail that had fallen during the day's work. "Carol said something like that. My wife, she passed 2 years ago." Maya didn't say she was sorry. She just looked at him. Pancreatic, fast. He put his level in the box. "The house is too quiet. Building things helps with that." They didn't say anything else for a while. They didn't need to. He came back every morning. 7 a.m. toolbox, canvas hat, 2 coffees from Rosie's in paper cups when the weather turned cold, which in Millhaven happened overnight without consultation on the first day of November. He showed Maya how to raise a wall from flat to plumb, how to brace it while you set the anchors, how to check a corner with the square at every stage. Not once at the end, every stage. "Why every time?" Maya asked. "Because it's easier to fix a small error early than a large one late." "That's a metaphor." "It's also carpentry," Walt said. "Both things can be true." The frame of a small structure began to rise on the north end of the foundation. 12 feet by 20, one room with a sleeping area and a small kitchen space, and a corner for the wood stove that Walt had already sourced from a man in the next county who was upgrading. It was not large. It was the right size. Maya came home to it every night. Home she had started using that word quietly internally, the way you test a word before you say it out loud, and it looked a little more like something that could keep the weather out, which was, she had decided, the minimum definition of home, something that keeps the weather out. Everything else was negotiable. The black SUV arrived on a Tuesday, clean, expensive, the kind of vehicle that announces itself before the door opens. Marcus Renner stepped out, late 40s, gray at the temples, the build of someone who played sports in college and kept enough of the habit to still look like it. Blue dress shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, business card between two fingers. He looked around the lot. His face went through something when he saw it. The cleared foundation, the rising frame, Ember watching from the north end with the focused assessment of someone who has appointed himself head of security and takes the role seriously. "You're the one who bought this parcel at the auction," Renner said. Maya didn't look up from what she was doing. She had learned in 20 years that the person who looks up first is already losing. "I am. Marcus Renner, Renner Development." He held out the card. She looked at it, didn't take it. He set it on the nearest concrete pile. "This property was flagged for commercial rezoning in the 2019 County Master Plan. The surplus listing should never have been processed. I've been in contact with the county assessor's office, and I'm filing a formal challenge to the sale." She looked at him then, fully. Ember stood up at the north end and began a slow, deliberate walk in Renner's direction. Not fast, not aggressive, just purposeful. "The sale was legal," Maya said. "I signed paperwork with the county clerk. Paperwork can be reviewed. So can history." Something moved in his face. The expression of a man who came in prepared for a specific conversation and has realized in the first 90 seconds that he is in a different one. "I'm not trying to make this difficult," he said. His voice was practiced, smooth in the way that means it had been smoothed over time. "But this parcel is part of a development plan that's been in progress for 2 years. The county was supposed to hold it. But they didn't. These things can be corrected." "What things?" Maya set down the level. "The part where your grandfather pressured the council to remove my grandfather from his position so he could control the water access. Is that the thing that gets corrected, or just the paperwork?" The smoothness stopped. He looked at her. Really looked at her, for a long moment. "You found the box," he said, quietly. Maya said nothing. Marcus Renner looked at the foundation, at the rising frame, at Ember, who had stopped 10 feet away and was now sitting watching with ears perfectly forward. "I'll be in touch," Renner said. He walked back to the SUV, started it, paused before pulling away long enough that Maya thought he might say something else. He didn't. He drove. The dust from his tires drifted across the lot and settled on the concrete. Maya stood there. "He knew about the box before I said anything about the box," which meant someone in the Renner family had always known it was there, which meant this wasn't about a master plan or a rezoning mistake, about the record it kept, about what happens when a record surfaces after 60 years. The letter from Renner's lawyer arrived 6 days later. Nora brought it. Certified mail. She'd signed for it at the hardware store because Maya still didn't have a mailbox. She stood at the gate, holding it between two fingers, the way you hold something that's technically necessary, but still unpleasant. "His lawyer's expensive," Nora said. "The letter looks it." Maya opened it. Dense, formal, 3 pages. Legal language that said in 300 words what could have been said in 30. Renner Development was formally challenging the auction sale of Lot 12 on grounds of improper surplus listing. A hearing had been scheduled with the County Board of Supervisors. 31 days. Maya looked up. Can they do this? They can file anything. Nora said. Doesn't mean they win. A pause. But the board has 5 members, and 3 of them have been on the Millhaven Council for a long time. And the Renner family, another pause, longer. They've had their fingers in this town for 3 generations. Maya folded the letter, put it in her jacket pocket against the photograph of Marlene in the journal. He knew about the box, she said. Nora went very still. What? When Renner came here, he said you found the box, before I described it, before I'd said what was in it. He already knew something was down there. Nora looked at her for a long moment. Her face moved through something complicated, from surprise, through calculation, through something older, something that had been sitting there a long time. Come with me, she said. The back room of Callaway Hardware. A filing cabinet against the wall, a workbench covered with receipts and invoices, and the organized chaos of a person who runs a small business alone. Nora pulled a drawer, riffled through, came out with a folder. Old. The kind that had been in that drawer a long time. Town records, she said. Copies from the county archive. My father kept them. I kept them after him. She spread the pages on the workbench. Meeting minutes from 1962, 1963, 1964. Maya leaned in. The language was bureaucratic and dry, but the meaning was not. January 1965. Council minutes. Motion to restructure the Office of Municipal Water Engineering. Sponsored by council members Pruitt Alderman Davies and Raymond Renner. Raymond Renner was on the council, Maya said. He got himself elected in 1963, Nora said. 2 years of maneuvering and then the vote went through. She pointed to a line. He sponsored the motion himself, voted on his own motion, and it passed 4-3. Maya looked at the names, at the vote breakdown, at the dry official language that said, the position of water engineer shall be restructured and redesignated effective March 1965, which was the official version of, we are removing the man who built this system and giving his job to someone we control. My father was in that room, Nora said. Her voice had gone flat, controlled in the way of something managed over a long time. He was an apprentice then, just starting out. He told me about it when I was 12. He said he watched it happen and he said nothing, and he was ashamed of that until the day he died. She closed the folder. When you showed up at that auction, she said, and bid on this lot, and I heard your name. A pause. I heard Hart and I had to leave the parking lot. Maya looked at her. You knew. I recognized the name. I didn't know you. Nora held her gaze. So I came to see if I was worth it, to see if you were real. Nora's voice was steady. The first time I came the water jug, I told myself it was just kind, but I was watching what you did, whether you'd quit, whether you were just passing through. Maya was quiet. Day 11, Nora said. It rained all morning, cold rain, the kind that finds its way through everything. I drove by and I could see your lot from the corner. And you were out there, in that rain, moving concrete, with Ember walking behind you like he'd been assigned. She stopped. That's when I knew you were a heart. The room was very quiet. The old coffee smell, the ficus that had been there longer than some of the inventory, the county records in their folder waiting. Your grandfather built this town's water supply, Nora said. My father drank that water every day for 40 years. Every person in Millhaven who turns on a tap is drinking from something Edward Hart built. She looked directly at Maya. You have every right to be here. And She stopped. Started again. My father said nothing in 1965. I'm not going to say nothing now. The hearing was in 31 days. Walt came every morning. They raised the walls, then the roof framing. Nora sourced a second-hand wood stove, she said, had come from a farmhouse auction and sold it at cost, which Maya knew wasn't true, but accepted anyway. The Millhaven community did a thing that small communities do when they've decided something. They showed up. Not dramatically, no announcement, no organized effort. Just Dave Perkins, the plumber, drove out one Tuesday and said his son was earning community service hours and needed a project. They ran a water line from the road connection, just like that. The diner Rosie's sent lunch 3 days in a row, delivered by a teenager in an apron who shrugged and said, "Rosie said to." Hank at the lumber yard called to say he had surplus framing wood he needed moved, and would Maya be willing to take it off his hands? His grandfather had been on Edward Hart's original crew in 1953. He mentioned this once, just once, then moved on to discussing wood grades. Maya didn't know how to process any of it. 7 group homes in 4 states. The invisibility of a child who moves through systems without leaving a mark. Nobody sends lunch to the group home. Nobody runs you a water line. She asked Nora about it one evening. Why are they doing this? Nora was restocking the paint aisle. Back to Maya, she didn't stop working. Because you're building something, she said. People in a small town notice when someone builds, especially when they've watched things fall apart for a long time. I just needed somewhere to sleep. I know. Nora turned around. That's how most good things start. Nobody wakes up thinking today I'll do something that matters. They just do what's in front of them. She went back to the paint aisle. That tower falling meant something to this town, not just the water. The tower. People watched it go down and nobody did anything with the lot for 8 years. It just sat there. Ruins. A pause. Then you came, 20 years old with a duffel bag, and bid $5 and started moving concrete with your bare hands. People need to see that. Maya said nothing. Thought about Edward in 1953, building a water system because a town needed one, not because he planned for it to matter, because it was the work in front of him and he did it right. On day 30, Marcus Renner came back. No SUV, a pickup truck, old enough to have a few opinions of its own. He wore jeans and work boots and a shirt with no logo. He stood at the gate and waited the same way Walt had waited on day 25, which was different from how he'd stood the first time. The first time he'd come through the gate like he owned it. Today he waited. Maya came to the gate. I want to make an offer, he said. His voice was different. The smoothness still there, but something underneath it now that hadn't been there before. Something that had cost something. $25,000, he said. Cash for the half acre. You walk away with that and the bond money. That's $77,000. That's, he paused. That's a real start. Somewhere with walls that aren't going to be contested. Maya looked at him. She thought about it. She let herself actually think about it. $77,000. The walls already half built. The foundation that had been waiting for her. The photograph of Marlene at 8 years old in her jacket pocket. No, she said. Renner's jaw tightened. You're turning down $77,000. Yes? Why? Maya looked past him at the lot, at the foundation, at the walls Walt had helped her raise, at Ember lying in his patch of November sun like he'd surveyed every patch on this half acre and selected the best one. Because my grandfather built this, she said, and your grandfather took it from him, and I'm not going to let that happen twice. Renner was quiet for a long moment. His face moved through something she wasn't sure she had words for. Not anger, something more complicated. The expression of a person who has been told a true thing about themselves that they already knew. He looked at the foundation. I knew, he said, quietly, not quite to her, to the air between them, to the concrete. About the box, my father knew. He found old papers in my grandfather's files in 1989 correspondence about the council vote, about the seal and the foundation, about what Edward Hart said before he left. He paused. He knew there was something down there, and he was afraid of what it meant. Maya waited. He told me to get the lot, Marcus said. When the county put it up for surplus 6 months ago, he said, buy it before anyone else does. Don't let anyone open what's under there. A long exhale. I spent 2 years trying to navigate the county planning process to get control of the parcel without going through auction. And then it went to auction anyway. And you paid $5. The corner of Maya's mouth moved. Almost. Almost. And now it's mine, she said. And now it's yours. He said it without argument, a statement of fact. He stood there for another moment. My daughter's name is Elise, he said. She's 9. He stopped, started again. I don't want her to grow up inheriting what I inherited, the way our family has operated, the choices we've made because of choices that were made before us. He looked at Maya directly. I want to break it. I don't know if it's too late, but I want to try. Maya was quiet. This man whose grandfather had driven her grandfather out of his own life, who had spent 2 years trying to do the same thing to her, who was now standing at her gate in a work shirt telling her he wanted to be different. Withdraw the legal challenge, she said. He nodded. That's what I came to tell you. I'm calling my lawyer tomorrow. Tell him why, Maya said. Not just that you're withdrawing, tell him why. Renner looked at her. Something passed across his face, the discomfort of being asked to do the harder version of the right thing. Then he nodded again. Once. Decided. Okay, he said. He turned back to his truck, stopped with his hand on the door. For what it's worth, he said. What you've built here. He looked at the lot one more time. The walls, the foundation, ember in his patch of sun. He would have liked it, what you're building. He got in the truck, drove away without another word. The dust settled. Ember got up from his patch of sun, walked over to Maya, pressed his head against her hip. She put her hand on his back. 30 days, she said. The hearing was tomorrow. She had Edward's journal, the photographs, the property deed, the bond receipts, the county records Nora had kept for 30 years in a filing cabinet in the back of a hardware store because her father had told her to, and she trusted her father. And she had this, the foundation, the rising walls, the work of 25 days. She went back to work because tomorrow was tomorrow. And tonight there was still daylight left, which Edward Hart would have considered sufficient reason to keep going. So she did. The morning of the hearing, Maya woke before the alarm she didn't have. 14 a.m. Dark still. Cold in the way that November in Illinois is cold, not politely, not apologetically, just completely, all the way down to the concrete she'd been sleeping near for 31 days. Except now, there were walls. And a roof. And a wood stove that Walt had gotten burning the night before, with the efficiency of a man who has been building fires longer than Maya had been alive. She lay there for a moment, ember pressed against her back, radiating heat, completely unconcerned about the hearing because Ember did not attend hearings. He attended perimeters, patches of sun, the bowl of kibble Nora brought every Tuesday in a paper bag she pretended was incidental. Ember had his priorities straight. Maya wished she could borrow them. She got up, put on the cleanest clothes she owned, the black jeans that had survived 3 months of foundation work with only minor concrete scarring, the dark green flannel Nora had left on the gate post 2 weeks ago with a note that said, "Found this in the back, probably fits, don't argue." It fit. She looked at herself in the small mirror she'd propped against the east wall. 20 years old, a face that had been outdoors for a month, a jaw she recognized now. The jaw in the photograph of Marlene at 8. The jaw in the photograph of Edward standing in front of the half-built tower in 1953. The same jaw, 3 generations, different people, same bone. You come from somewhere, the mirror said. She picked up the folder. Edward's journal, the photographs, the property deed, the county records Nora had held for 30 years, the bond receipts from Mrs. Aldrich's office stamped, unofficial. She walked out into the dark. Ember followed to the gate, stopped. He was not going to the courthouse. He was going to maintain the perimeter. This was also important work, and he intended to do it. "I'll be back," Maya said. One tail wag, slow, certain. She walked toward town. The County Board of Supervisors hearing room smelled like old carpet and institutional coffee that had been burning in a glass pot since 7 a.m. and no one had addressed. 5 board members behind a long table. Dr. Patricia Webb, chairwoman, 60 gray braid, reading glasses she kept taking off and putting on as though the right prescription might change the documents in front of her. Marcus Renner sat on the left side of the room. No lawyer, no leather briefcase. He had withdrawn the formal challenge 8 days ago. His actual lawyer had apparently required 3 separate phone calls to process this decision. He was here anyway, which Maya hadn't expected. She nodded at him. He nodded back. Not warm, not cold. The nod of 2 people who have agreed to stop doing something that was going to hurt both of them. Dr. Webb called the hearing to order, read the record, the surplus listing of Lot 12, the auction, the sale, Marcus Renner's formal challenge filed 11 days prior, and then the formal withdrawal of said challenge received 8 days prior. She looked up. "Mr. Renner, do you wish to confirm the withdrawal of your challenge?" Marcus stood. "Yes." A pause. "And I'd like to add for the record that the sale was legally conducted. The surplus listing was appropriate. The property was properly available for auction." Another pause. "The kind that costs something. And that the Hart family has a historical and legitimate connection to that parcel that should be recognized." Silence in the room. Dr. Webb looked at him over her reading glasses, then at Maya. "Ms. Hart, do you have anything to add?" Maya stood. She had prepared something. 3 nights of preparing something. Quiet, logical, structured, with the journal and the records and the photograph and the whole carefully assembled case that she had been ready to make. She looked at the board, thought about Edward sitting in a car writing meeting minutes in a journal, thought about Marlene at 8 years old in front of a fence that was still standing, thought about a box sealed into a foundation in 1965 and opened by a 20-year-old in October 2021 because a dog wouldn't stop digging. "My grandfather built the water tower on that lot in 1953, she said. "He was removed from his position in 1965 by political pressure. He sealed everything he had into the foundation before he left. I found it 31 days ago." She paused. "I'm still here. I intend to keep being here." She sat down. Dr. Webb looked at her for a long moment, put on her reading glasses, looked at the file, took them off again. "The board finds the sale of Lot 12 was conducted in accordance with county surplus procedures. No procedural error occurred. The challenge is formally withdrawn. The sale stands." She looked at Maya. "The property is yours, Ms. Hart." Gavel down. That was it. No dramatic music, no crowd going wild. Just a gavel and the sound of chairs scraping back and people gathering their papers. Maya sat in her chair for a moment longer than necessary, because the legs she was planning to stand on felt like they needed a moment to confirm their participation. "It's yours. The property is yours." She stood up, walked out of the building into November air that hit her face like water. Nora was on the steps, Walt beside her, Dave the plumber who had run the water line, Hank from the lumberyard, the woman from the church who had brought fried chicken 6 weeks ago and never said her name. 3 or 4 others she recognized from the lot without having learned yet who they were. Nora looked at her. "Well, it's mine," Maya said. Nora hugged her. Fast, firm, both arms. The hug of someone who has been waiting 30 years, her whole life, really since her father died, with the shame of that council vote still somewhere in his chest to do this particular thing for this particular person. Walt shook her hand. "Let's get back to work," he said. Yes, exactly. The correct response to everything. But first, there was still something she hadn't done. That afternoon, she opened the second envelope. She'd been saving it since day 20. When she found the journal and the back entries and the truth about what Edward had done and what the system had done and what the distance between those two things had cost both of them. She'd been saving the letter because the letter was the last direct communication between this man and whoever came after him. And she'd needed to be ready. She thought she was ready now. She sat on the foundation, not inside the small house, not at the workbench. Outside, on the concrete, where she could see the whole lot. The fence, the gate, the rising structure, the November sky above all of it. Embers settled beside her. She broke the seal. 2 pages, the same handwriting as the back entries of the journal, slow, careful, formed with precision by hands that had spent 60 years doing precise things. Dated September 2008, to whoever carries the heart name forward. If you're reading this, you found your way here. You found what's left of the tower. You found the chamber I built when I was 32 years old and still believed I could outsmart the people who wanted to take what I'd built. My name is Edward Hart. I was the municipal water engineer for Millhaven, Illinois from 1953 to 1965. I built this tower with my own hands and a crew of 4 men and the stubbornness of someone who has decided the work matters. Every valve in this system I tested myself. Every section of pipe I walked above after it was laid. The water that ran to every house in this town ran because I built it right. They took the job from me, not for cause, because Raymond Renner wanted control of the water access and I was in the way. That's the whole story. The full version of it is in the journal. I lost the job, then Frances, then Marlene, not all at once, over years. Frances died in 1972. Marlene left in 1974 and didn't call. I looked for 3 years and didn't find her, then stopped looking, which I will regret for the rest of my life, however long that turns out to be. In 2005, a woman from Ohio Social Services called me. Marlene had died in February. She had a daughter, 4 years old, named Maya. I tried to bring her home. I was 84 years old, and I had a heart condition, and I lived in a rented room, and I tried with everything I had. They said no. They said I was too old and too sick and too unstable and that the girl needed qualified care. I called every month for 4 years, asked after her. They gave me very little. I sent things. I don't know if she received them. If you're Maya, I tried. I want you to know that first, before anything else. I tried. If you're not Maya, you still found this place. You still cared enough to look. That's enough for me. The bonds are yours. The land is yours. The photographs and the journal are yours. I built this system to give a town something it needed. I built this chamber to give a future to whoever came next. You found your way home. Build something. Stay. Edward Hart, September 2008. Maya read it twice, 3 times, folded it along the original creases, held it against her chest, because she had been 4 years old when Marlene died, and she had no memory of the call coming, of the social worker who contacted her grandfather, of the forms filed and the evaluations conducted and the decisions made in rooms she wasn't in by people who had decided they knew what was best for her. Because she had been 8 years old when Edward stopped calling, too young to know that anyone was calling at all, moved to a different facility, different state, and a man in Springfield, Illinois was calling a number that no longer reached her. Because she had been 14 when Vera died, and after Vera there was no one left who remembered her as a specific. As a person with a history and a name that meant something, not a case file, not a placement, a person. And this entire time there had been a box in the ground, waiting, with his handwriting on it. She pressed her palms flat on the cold concrete, Edward's concrete, felt the texture of it under her hands, 4 inches thick, reinforced and waterproofed, and poured by a man who believed that what you put in the ground should last. It had lasted 68 years. He made it here, she said, quiet to ember to the November sky. But she needed to know the rest of it. The letter said September 2008. The journal entry said he was driving back. There was a gap between those two things, between the letter and whatever came after. She didn't know what happened in those missing days. Not yet. Nora drove her to the county library the next morning. The Millhaven Register archives. Microfilm. The quiet of a research room at 9 a.m. when you're looking for something you're almost afraid to find. They found the death notice first. October 14th, 2008. Route 940 miles west of Millhaven. An unidentified male. Cardiac arrest. Vehicle registered to Edward R. Hart, Springfield, Illinois. Personal effects road maps. A brown leather journal. A manila envelope. Maya stopped reading. Looked at the wall above the microfilm machine. A brown leather journal. He'd been writing in it right up until he couldn't. He died with his own words in the car, which felt important in a way she couldn't fully articulate. That he'd been in conversation with himself until the end. That he was still someone who put things in writing because putting things in writing was how he understood the world. Nora, she said. I know. They sat there for a moment. He drove from Springfield, Maya said. 11 hours, he said so in the letter. He came here first, opened the foundation, sealed the letter. Yes. The death notice is dated October 14th. The letter is September. She did the math. He was here for at least 2 weeks, maybe more, before he drove back. Nora was quiet. What was he doing here for 2 weeks, Maya said. Nora pulled up the search function, typed a different date range, search for Hart. Nothing. Search for anonymous, for community, for gift, and found it. October 2nd, 2008. A small column in the local section of the Register, 3 paragraphs. The kind of piece that runs when there's nothing else, and the editor is fond of human interest. Local families receive anonymous donations. 4 families in Millhaven had received envelopes of cash in their mailboxes over the span of a week in late September. No notes, no names. The Perkins family, the Alderman family, the Voss family, and the Briggs family, each of whom had a connection to the original municipal water project of 1953. Walt Briggs, Dave Perkins's father, 2 others. Maya looked at Nora. Nora was looking at the screen with an expression Maya had never seen on her before. Something past surprise. Something that had gone all the way through surprise and come out the other side into something older and quieter. He gave away what he had left, Maya said. Nora nodded, slow, before he drove back. Maya looked at the column again. The careful, neutral language of small-town journalism trying to report a mystery without solving it. He came here. He sealed the letter. He spent weeks leaving money at people's doors. And then he got in his car. Nora reached over and put her hand over Maya's. Just for a moment. He came home, Nora said. He spent weeks being home. And then he drove back. A pause. His heart gave out 40 miles from here. The library was very quiet. The microfilm machine hummed. Dust moved in the light from the window above the stacks. He made it far enough, Maya said. Those were the words she needed. The truest thing she knew about any of it. He had made it. Gotten here. Done what he came to do. Sat in this town for weeks and let it be his town again for the last time. And then driven away and not made it back to Springfield. Which was hard, which would always be hard. But he had been here. He had walked these streets. He had left something at Walt Briggs's door. He had sealed a letter and put it in the ground for her. He had been so close. He had always been so much closer than she knew. She drove back to the lot alone. Nora offered to come. Maya shook her head. Some things need to settle in private, in a space that belongs to you, without witness. She sat on the foundation in the November afternoon. Ember came and lay his head on her knee without being asked. without being invited, the way he always did. His eyes half closed, his left leg stretched out fully beside him, relaxed and easy now, the limp that had marked his first weeks on this lot long since gone. His head on her knee, her hand on his back. The sky going from pale blue to the particular pale orange that November afternoons do before the cold really sets in. She reached into her duffel bag. She'd been carrying it with her for 3 months, the whole time. In the car before the car died, walking into Millhaven, at the auction, on this lot for 32 days. Always. Vera's olive tin. She set it on her knee, beside Ember's head. She'd been carrying it for 6 years. Since the afternoon she'd come home from school and found Vera on the kitchen floor and known before she got close. Known in the way you know when the world has changed in a way it's not going to change back from. She'd been 14 and she'd sat on the kitchen floor with Vera for a long time before she called anyone. Because calling someone would make it real, and she needed a few more minutes of it not being real. Then she called, and they came, and they took Vera. And then they came for Maya. And what Maya took with her, what she held on to through 7 placements in 4 states and 2 years on her own after the system let her go, was this tin. Vera's sewing kit, the thimble worn smooth, the measuring tape, the photograph tucked under the lid. She knew the inside of this tin by heart. She had never taken out all the contents at once, never fully disassembled it. It was the kind of thing you keep exactly as it is because the arrangement is part of the meaning. But now, she set everything on the concrete beside her, needles in their paper wrap, thread in its colors, green and white, and the dusty rose Vera used for the dress she'd been repairing when she died. Thimble, measuring tape. The photograph of Vera at 40 standing in a backyard Maya didn't recognize, squinting into the sun. The tin was empty. Maya tilted it, turned it over. The inside was lined with felt dark green faded at the edges. She had always assumed the lining was glued directly to the tin. She pressed it with her thumb. The felt shifted, slightly, just slightly. She pressed harder. The entire base of the tin lifted, not the whole thing, just the lining, which was adhered to a thin cardboard backing, which was not glued to the tin at all, but simply resting inside it. A false bottom. The kind of thing you'd only find if you were looking for it, or if you had run out of everything else to look for and started looking at the things you'd been holding the whole time. She lifted the cardboard out. Underneath a folded piece of paper, small, cream-colored, the fold lines had gone soft with age. Her hands were not entirely steady. She unfolded it. Vera's handwriting. She'd know it anywhere. The particular lean of it, the slight flourish on the capital M that was more personality than penmanship, the one Vera would have denied was a flourish if you'd pointed it out. One line, just one, Millhaven, Illinois, Tower Road, Lot 12. And below that in smaller letters, when you're ready. Maya sat very still, for a long time. The November sun tracked across the sky the way it does when you're not measuring time, in its own direction, at its own pace. Vera knew. Vera knew about Millhaven, about the lot, about what was here, which meant Marlene had told her. Marlene, who had left home at 18 and run and kept running, who had ended up in Ohio with a daughter she named Maya, and a hospital form she filled out with her father's name as next of kin, had at some point told Vera, before the accident, before the end, had told the woman who would raise her daughter about the place where her father had built something and been pushed out and left something behind. And Vera had kept her promise. Whatever Marlene had asked, don't tell her, don't take her there, don't bring the old pain forward. Vera had agreed. And Vera had kept that agreement the way Vera kept everything completely, without compromise, without exception. But she hadn't thrown the paper away. She had folded it, put it at the bottom of the tin, under the lining, in the thing she knew Maya would keep forever, would carry through every placement, would hold on to through every night on a shelter floor, and every morning when nothing was certain except the tin and what was in it. Vera had hidden a map in the one thing Maya would never let go of. Not in case Maya went looking, not as instructions, as a contingency, as a faith, as someday when enough time has passed and this child is strong enough and the world has given her enough hard ground to stand on, someday she will open the thing she's been carrying and she will know where to go. When you're ready. Maya looked at the tin. She had been carrying Millhaven for 6 years. She had walked into this town with it in her bag, had bid $5 on this lot with it in her bag, had slept on this foundation with it pressed against her side. She had been ready. She had just needed the car to die. 3 days later, a girl appeared at the gate. 17. Maybe. The age was in the shape of her still not fully grown, but trying hard not to show it. A jacket 2 sizes too large, in sneakers with the soles separating at the toe, in the posture of someone who has learned to make herself smaller in new spaces. A backpack that had seen better years, in a plastic grocery bag in one hand with the bulge of folded clothes inside. She stood at the gate, didn't come through, just stood, evaluating the lot, the structure. Ember, who had raised his head from his patch of sun and was performing his assessment with the thoroughness he brought to all things. Maya set down the chisel she'd been working with. "Can I help you?" The girl looked at her. Dark eyes, tired in a way that comes from more than one bad night, more than a few. "I saw a sign," she said. "On Route 9, community workshop, free tools." Maya had put the sign up 5 days ago, a piece of plywood, hand-painted. Nora had said it looked like a child made it. Maya had said, "Good. Children need workshops." "That's us," Maya said. The girl looked at the lot again. The structure. The workbench Walt had built against the south wall. Tools hanging on the pegboard. Ember, who had completed his assessment, found it satisfactory and put his head back down. "I don't have any," the girl started, stopped. "Money," Maya said. "Yeah, good. Neither does the workshop." The girl came through the gate, slowly, the bag bumping against her leg. She stood in the lot and looked around with the eyes of someone who has trained themselves to identify exits before anything else. "I'm Maya." A pause. Wren, small, precise, capable of a great deal of noise if provoked. "You hungry, Wren?" "I'm fine," which meant yes. Maya had used that exact sentence in exactly that tone for 2 years. It was a very specific brand of fine. She made 2 sandwiches from the bread and peanut butter that lived on the kitchen shelf. The kitchen shelf being a plank Walt had installed at the right height with the precision of a man who takes plank installation seriously. Set both plates on the workbench. Poured 2 cups of the coffee that now lived permanently on the east end of the bench between the belt sander and a jar of wood screws. Wren ate without being told to. Fast, then slowed down. The way people slow down when they realize there's more where that came from. "Where are you staying?" Maya asked. Long pause. "Figuring that out." "How long have you been figuring it out?" Wren looked at her. 3 weeks. Maya nodded. Didn't push. Didn't ask the follow-up questions that made people feel interrogated, the why and the how and the what happened before. Because she knew what it felt like to be asked those questions when what you actually needed was the sandwich. "I have a room," Maya said. "Small, bed and a dresser. The wood stove keeps the whole place warm. Hot water in the mornings. It's yours if you want it." Wren looked at her. "You don't know me. You walked 3 miles from Route 9 with a grocery bag. I know enough. What if I mess something up? Then we fix it." Maya looked at her steadily. "That's what the workshop is for." Wren was quiet for a long moment, looked at the lot, the foundation, the walls, the sign on the south beam that Walt had burned into a piece of cedar Millhaven Community Workshop, estered in November 2021. "You built all this," Wren said. "Most of it, with help." "From who?" A 72-year-old carpenter who drinks his coffee before dawn and once accidentally glued his hand to a sawhorse and had to call the hardware store for acetone. Something moved in Ren's face. Small, uncertain, but real. How long did he stay glued? 45 minutes. He finished plumbing the south wall before he called. The small thing in Ren's face became a real thing. A laugh, short, surprised at itself. Okay, she said. She moved in that afternoon. Maya showed her the room, a proper room now, 6 feet by 8 feet a door, with a latch, a bed frame Walt had built from reclaimed oak, because he said sleeping on a folding cot was not acceptable in a house he helped build. A dresser with 3 working drawers and one that stuck unless you lifted and pulled simultaneously, which Walt called a design feature and Maya called a drawer that needed fixing, and which she had not yet fixed because there was always something more urgent. The stove runs all night, Maya said. Keeps it about 65 in here by morning. If you want warmer, you can add a piece at 11. Okay. Bathroom's yours whenever. There's food on the kitchen shelf. Don't ask me before you take it. Just take it. Ren looked at her. Why are you doing this? And Maya thought about the question. Thought about Vera, who had taken in a 4-year-old she had no blood obligation to and worked 2 cleaning jobs to keep the apartment and taught her to thread a needle and said the best thing about fixing something is it stays fixed. Thought about Nora, who had shown up on day 4 with a water jug and gloves and no questions. Who had kept 30 years of county records in a filing cabinet because her father told her to. Thought about Walt, who had kept a photograph for 13 years and waited on the other side of a fence to see if the right person would come. Thought about Edward, who had knitted a blanket in a rented room because he didn't know how, and taught himself because he needed to give something, and this was what he had. Because someone did it for me, she said, and the only way to pay that back is forward. Ren nodded, didn't say anything else. But that night, Maya heard the shower running for 40 minutes and didn't say a word about it. Because she remembered what it felt like. Hot water after months without it. You stand there until the warmth goes all the way in. Walt came the next morning at 7. Found Ren in the workshop already, sweeping sawdust from the workbench with the focused attention of someone who has decided that if they're going to be somewhere, they're going to be useful there. He looked at her. She looked at him. Walt Briggs, he said. Ren, you know how to use a hand plane. No? You will by noon. Walt put a scrap of pine on the bench, demonstrated the grip, the angle, the long, even stroke that peels a ribbon of wood so thin you can see light through it. Ren watched with the attention of someone who does not perform interest but actually has it. She picked it up. First stroke too shallow. He adjusted her angle without words, just moved her hand to the right position. Second stroke better. Third stroke, a ribbon of wood curled off the pine and fell to the floor, and Ren looked at it with an expression Maya recognized. The look of someone who just discovered they could do something they didn't know they could do. Something opening. Quietly. Carefully. You've worked with wood before, Walt said. A little. Last foster placement. The dad had a garage. Walt handed her another piece of pine. What happened to that placement? They moved. Couldn't take me. He nodded, not with pity, not with the careful softness that adults use when they're trying not to upset you. Just received. Understood. Moving on. What you're looking for, Walt said, is the grain. Always work with the grain, not against it. He showed her where the grain ran in the piece of pine. How to read it. If you work against the grain, he said, the wood fights you. If you work with it, another ribbon, perfect. Ren looked at the ribbon, then at Walt. It doesn't fight, she said. No. He picked up his coffee. Most things don't, if you figure out which direction they're going. Marcus Renner came on a Saturday. Not alone. He held the hand of a girl who was 9 years old with her father's dark hair and her own very particular expression, serious and curious, and not yet impressed by anything, because she had not been given sufficient evidence to be impressed. His daughter Elise. They stood at the gate, Marcus in jeans and a flannel shirt, not quite comfortable. The posture of a man who has decided to be somewhere and is working on deserving to be there. She wants to build something, Marcus said. I heard there are classes on Saturdays. Maya looked at Elise. Elise looked back with the direct assessment of a 9-year-old who has not yet learned to pretend she's not evaluating you. We have birdhouse kits, Maya said. Third bench on the left. Walt teaches it. Marcus nodded. He walked his daughter to Walt's station. Walt handed Elise a piece of pre-cut pine and a small hammer without commentary. She held the hammer, looked at it, like she was deciding whether it was a reasonable object. Apparently it was. She set the pine on the bench and hit a nail. The nail went in crooked. Try again, Walt said. She pulled it out, set another nail, hit it again, straighter. Better, Walt said. Not effusively, just factually. Better. Marcus stood nearby, watching his daughter, and for a few minutes he looked like any other father at a workshop, just a man watching his kid discover something. Not a Renner, not a developer, not the grandson of Raymond Renner who had stood in a council room in 1965 and voted to erase a good man's work. Just a father, watching his daughter hit a nail straight for the first time. Before he left, he stopped by Maya's bench. She was sharpening chisels, the repetitive, satisfying work of restoring an edge. He stood there for a moment. She kept working. She had a good time, he said, nodding toward Elise, who was now carrying a lopsided birdhouse with the visible pride of someone who has made a thing with their own hands for the first time. She can come back whenever she wants, Maya said. Marcus was quiet. She kept the chisel moving, steady, even. I'm sorry, he said. She stopped, looked at him. For the lawsuit, he said. For all of it. For what my grandfather did, and for what my father did about it, and for what I was doing about what they did. A pause. I know that doesn't fix anything. I'm not saying it to fix anything. I'm saying it because it's true, and it needed to be said. Maya looked at him for a long time. He didn't flinch, which was different. I know, she said. He nodded. Elise wants to come back next Saturday, he said. The workshop is open. He left. Maya watched him take his daughter's hand at the gate, the lopsided birdhouse in Elise's other hand. They walked to his truck. He buckled her in first, then went around to his side, drove away. The dust settled. Ember lifted his head from his patch of sun, looked at Maya, looked at the gate, looked back at Maya. I know, she said. He put his head back down. November deepened. The workshop filled on Saturdays. Walt's class grew from 4 to 9. A father and son building a bookshelf, 2 women learning the table saw an older man named Ruiz restoring a rocking chair with the patience of someone who understood that the right pace for a thing is the pace the thing requires. Wren enrolled at Millhaven High. She didn't announce this. She just came back one afternoon with a backpack that had school papers in it instead of clothes and said, I went. Maya said, okay. That was the whole conversation. But that night at dinner, actual dinner at the small table Walt had built from reclaimed lumber, Nora, who came most evenings and always brought something she claimed was leftovers. Nora said, how was it? Wren looked at her plate. Fine, she said, which meant something completely different than the last time she'd said it. This fine meant hard, but manageable. But I went, which is the first step. Same time tomorrow, Maya said. Wren looked up. Same time tomorrow, she said. Nora passed the bread without comment. Ember under the table waited for the scrap that everyone pretended they weren't going to give him, and which everyone gave him anyway. One evening in late November, after Walt had gone home, and Wren was inside doing homework at the kitchen table, and Nora had dropped off soup she claimed was leftovers from a pot she'd made on Tuesday, but which Maya was fairly certain she'd made that afternoon. Maya sat on the porch of her house. The porch being 3 steps Walt had built the week before because he said, "You need somewhere to sit outside that isn't the foundation. You've been sitting on the foundation for 2 months. Your back is going to have opinions about this eventually." She sat on the steps, ember pressed against her left side. The November air, cold, clear. The kind of cold that means a clear night, and a clear night means stars. They came out slowly. 1, then 5, then more. Then all of them the way stars come out when there's no light pollution all at once, like a held breath released. She had seen this sky her first night here. Same stars, different Maya. Or maybe the same Maya. Maybe the Maya who had lain on this concrete with a tarp and a duffel bag and a stray dog she'd just met had already known somewhere below the surface that this was where she was supposed to be. Had already recognized something in the ground under her back, in the October air, in the way Ember had pressed against her side before he knew her. She reached into her jacket pocket. The journal. She'd been carrying it every day since she found it, the way she'd carried Vera's tin for 6 years. The things you carry are the things you're not ready to put down. The things you're not ready to put down are the things that still have something left to give. She opened it to the inside front cover. Edward Hart's handwriting. April 1953. The date he'd started. The work. The life he'd built here. She reached into her other pocket. A pencil. She'd been thinking about this for a week. Whether it was the right thing, whether she had the right, whether someone who'd been here 2 months, who didn't know this town, who'd bought it for $5 because she needed somewhere to sleep, whether she was entitled to put her name in this book. She thought about Edward saving bonds at $50 at a time for 8 years because he believed in a future he couldn't see. She thought about Vera folding a piece of paper and putting it under a tin lining because she trusted that her granddaughter would be ready when the time came. She thought about Walt keeping a photograph for 13 years and waiting at a gate. She thought about Marlene putting her father's name on a hospital form, running for 26 years and still at the end reaching back toward home. She pressed the pencil to the page, below Edward's handwriting, below the date, below the work and the loss and the 68 years between that April and this November. Maya Hart, Workshop, Mill Haven, November 2021. She looked at it. The 2 lines, his and hers, 68 years apart. The same last name, the same ground, the same quality of stubbornness that made a man pour a foundation 4 inches thick when 2 would have done, and that made his granddaughter bid $5 on a pile of rubble because something she hadn't known what told her this was the right pile of rubble. She closed the journal, held it in both hands. Ember pressed harder against her side. The workshop stood dark and quiet. The steel frame Walt and Maya had built using the salvaged beams from the collapsed tower itself, the tower that had fallen in 2013 and been left as ruins for 8 years, and that now held up a roof under which people came on Saturdays to make things with their hands. The long workbench along the south wall, the pegboard with its tools, Walt's coffee maker between the belt sander and the jar of wood screws, the cedar sign Mill Haven Community Workshop, Esternay in November 2021. Not fancy, not large, exactly the right size. Behind her through the window, she could hear Wren turning pages at the kitchen table. The sound of someone doing homework, an ordinary sound, the most ordinary sound, a sound that had never felt ordinary to Maya before because ordinary had never been something she was allowed to keep long enough for it to feel like her own. She looked at the spot in the foundation where the chamber had been. She'd poured new concrete over it after they lifted the panel back into place. Walt had insisted they seal it properly, said, "You don't leave a chamber open, you close it when you're done." So they'd closed it, poured the new concrete, smoothed it. The seam was still faintly visible if you knew where to look. Ember walked over to it, stood there. He did this sometimes, walked to the exact spot, stood on it for a moment, then came back. She had a theory about this. He knew it was special. Dogs know. Not the way people know, not with analysis or meaning-making, just this place, this spot. Something happened here that mattered, and it still matters. And I was part of it, which was enough, which was actually everything. Maya looked at the stars, thought about Edward driving 11 hours with a bad heart to sit in a park near an elementary school he had never been to watch children come out the gate in the afternoon, to look for a face he had only seen in a social worker's file description. Dark hair, small for her age, mother's eyes. He had sat there, watched, hoped. Then he had driven away. 40 miles and his heart had made its final decision, which was hard, which would always be hard. But he had been here. He had come home. He had done everything he could do with what he had left, and what he'd left behind in the ground in the box in the letter had found its way to her. He made it far enough. Those were the words she'd said to Nora in the library, and they were true. The truest thing she knew about any of it. You don't have to make it all the way home. You just have to make it far enough to leave something for whoever comes next. Edward had left a foundation. Vera had left a map. Marlene, who had run so far and so long and never found a way back, had left her name on a hospital form and given her daughter a last name that meant something in the one town Marlene had spent years trying to forget, which was its own kind of leaving a map, its own kind of faith. Maya sat on the porch of the house she had built on the ground her grandfather had loved in the town that had finally let a heart come home. Ember breathed against her leg. The workshop waited in the dark. Tomorrow Walt would come at 7. 2 coffees, canvas hat, whatever project needed doing. Wren would walk to school the second week, the third the weeks accumulating the way weeks do when you let them quietly without marking each one until you look up one day and realize, I've been here. This has been mine. Nora would open the hardware store at 7. Make soup she'd claim was leftovers. Marcus would bring Elise on Saturday. The birdhouses would accumulate. And in the spring she'd already decided this quietly without ceremony. In the spring she would put in a garden. Behind the east fence where the soil was good. Tomatoes. Beans. Maybe the lavender that Vera had kept in a window box in an apartment they couldn't afford to heat properly, but kept heated anyway because Vera said some things aren't optional. Growing things. That was next. Home isn't where you're born, Maya thought. It's where you stop running and build something and stay. The stars burned overhead. The same stars Edward had looked at through a car window on Route 9 in the fall of 2008. The same stars Marlene had looked at from whatever window she'd been near when she finally stopped moving and thought about home. The same stars Vera had looked at from the kitchen window of the apartment where she'd taught a 4-year-old to thread a needle and had quietly, carefully folded a map and put it somewhere safe. The same stars Maya had looked at her first night on this lot, flat on her back on a concrete foundation. $53 to her name. A stray dog she'd just met pressed against her side. Afraid. Not the running away kind of afraid. The other kind. The standing still kind. The afraid that means this is the last option and I don't have anywhere left to go, and the only thing left to do is stay. She had stayed, and the foundation had held. Ember came back from the sealed chamber and walked to her side and pressed his head against her knee and sighed the long, contented sigh of a dog who has had a full day and is now exactly where he intends to be. Yeah, Maya said. She put her hand on his back. The workshop stood quiet, waiting for morning, for someone to come through the gate and say, I don't know how to make things, and for someone to say, yes, you do. You just haven't started yet. That was the work. Ordinary and extraordinary at once. Every day and once in a lifetime at once. A foundation that held. A chamber that kept. A letter that waited. A girl who came. The tower had fallen, but the foundation had held. And on the foundation, all of this.